Good evening and welcome to the Eldritch Avenue podcast, documenting a lifetime of experiences with the ridiculous, the absurd, the unusual, the peculiar, and the sometimes unfathomable. I am your host, Joel Norman, sharing with you the many inexplicable happenings which have occurred to me over the course of my 57 years here on planet Earth. I will present my experiences of time spent on the eldritch frontiers in 3 waves. The first wave stories will be the easiest for you to digest. These stories are non-threatening, easy to comprehend, and readily placed in reality. The second wave stories, though readily placed in reality, will be difficult to listen to, and only the empathetic mind will get through them. The third wave stories will look at these things all sane persons edit out of their conscious lives as they carefully curate the content of their reality. These are the things your mind will be desperate for you to avoid. These stories open wide that which is named the eldritch, that being the otherworldly, that which is beyond. Welcome back to Eldritch Avenue, part 3 of the Elvin Secret Stairs. Last time, I think when I signed off, I was talking about what was going on at my residence in college at 3004 Ross Road. And I was leaning towards the next story being one of the more pronounced and amazing couple of experiences on my parents' farm in Iowa. But going through my notes and my manuscript for my book, I realized that there was a really critical event that occurred in upstate New York in the mid-90s. Before the events at my parents' farm, and I feel like that's kind of an important step to make sure I take on the way to other stories. So this episode is going to be about my experience in upstate New York, when by pure happenstance and chance, just pure chance, I guess you would say, I ended up staying at Whitley Strieber's cabin. Now, I'm not sure if any of you know who Whitley Strieber is, but he really is, in my opinion, the person who brought the image of the Greys to the public eye with his best-selling Communion series. Communion was the first one, then there was Transformation, and then Breakthrough. And I had mentioned in last week's episode about my friend Ryant, who brought me, the Communion book by Whitley Strieber. So I'm going to go ahead and focus on my visit to Whitley Strieber's cabin in upstate New York. I do have a few notes I'd like to share with you, just sort of in preparation, just about this topic and how it has impacted my life, and of course, since we had the UAP congressional hearings last week, which were very interesting. And honestly, I was very surprised by what was being said. Unfortunately, some people in Congress or in the government made them hold back some of the witnesses because they were going to have I think 6 or 7 witnesses there, but they only had the 3. That was disappointing because I feel like, a panel of 7 highly accredited witnesses would have been more impressive and more important and equally necessary. But at any rate, I was very excited by those hearings, and I'm very interested to see when the next hearings will be, because many of the Congress who were on those panels, on that panel for that hearing, said there will be more, hearings. So I will monitor that going forward, of course. But back to Eldritch Avenue and the Elvin Secret Stairs story today. I just wanted to share some notes. Just from my perspective, people tell themselves, whatever they need to in order to satisfy the validity of their inner narrative, especially concerning, this now emerging reality of UAPs as it impacts everybody as something that is real now. Because if the government's saying it's real, it's probably closer to real than it was before. The UAP narrative is often ridiculed publicly, and it's ridiculed in a multiple array of forums. I've witnessed that over the years. It's not just theists that are the ones having the knee-jerk reaction, at any rate. Atheists as well harbor distinct biases toward the topic. Ultimately, I'm not saying there isn't an afterlife, not saying there isn't life after death. I'm just standing up for the idea that there are countless realities as detailed by the many worlds or parallel worlds theorem acknowledged by physicists across the globe. There are plenty of reputable scientific sources that treat the parallel universes theorem with respect, including the BBC, PBS Nova, Forbes, New York Times, Nature Journal, and many others, all of whom agree that the science leading up to this idea is valid. As detailed by Brian Greene, who was a professor of physics at Cornell University, the many worlds interpretation is an interpretation of quantum mechanics that asserts that the universal wave function is objectively real and that there is no wave function collapse. That is how they explain how the universe exists. No one owns it. No one owns the universe. It just is. There are many myths going back over thousands of years from multiple sources that tell the story of the origin of the universe. No one culture or people originated it, and yet many people feel a need to own it and claim it. It's funny how they are so willing to speak up when criticizing UAP sightings, yet get instantly angry, defensive, or flippant in their attitude when someone presents the science to support UAPs. Their position seems rather fragile in the face of the now government-confirmed UAP accounts. Still, the talking heads need to assure their viewers that this is just a contrivance. Whatever. Good luck with that in the next 10 years. But as I've said before, don't believe me, do the research. Okay, just do the research. Listen to the actual accredited experts and reputable news sources. Listen to the accounts of respected military personnel who have gone on the record repeatedly. I've mentioned, additionally to those I mentioned last episode, there are other people you can research. U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, U.S. Air Force Airman John Burroughs and Jim Pennison are three prominent examples. These are honorably discharged and retired armed services members who insist they witnessed UAPs, sometimes close up, very close. So if you choose to look away, it isn't because UAPs aren't there, it is because they may be. I'm used to this isolation. I have zero codependent needs. I've been dealing with extreme social isolation since I was very young. I've endured abuse, and bullshit like you would not believe. Very few persons are capable of managing what I've lived with for the past 57 years. I do not care one iota about how I am perceived. I said that before, I'm saying it again now, and I will continue to say that. The universe is one gargantuan rabbit hole, and I've been learning to navigate the extremes of that rabbit hole for decades by myself. Not entirely, but 99% of the time, yes. So contrive whatever rhetoric you must, say what you will, but I've been there and returned perfectly lucid, satisfactorily well-adjusted, and laser-focused on the framework of the multiple reality system we live in every day. I see its contours. I face it head on. I believe in being prepared for whatever comes my way. All right. Let's see. So, I've done, plenty of research, really. I've done a lot of reading, and talked to a number of people. And in my research, there's been a good many video-based podcasts out there, and I've not seen a lot of them. I've watched and sampled a good percentage of them, I guess I would say. Well, enough, I feel, though I have sampled many, and it seems there are a great deal of podcasters who have not had UAP experiences themselves. Maybe there are. There must be those who are witnesses, I'm guessing. But my podcast is coming from personal experience and being someone with a lifetime of just observing and watching. As a member of the LGBT community, I can attest to being marginalized from an early age. When this happens, you often must just watch without participating because society, up until just a few years ago, would not abide gay men having a voice. There has always been a slightly menacing attitude towards gays, and as a gay man, I've always felt a constant, almost subliminal threat. As someone who has been beaten until I physically collapse by the very people who are supposed to be protecting me, I can say without hesitation that I've learned to just watch and carefully pick my battles. I mean, that's an old saying, choose your battles. It's quite true for me. And so I have watched very carefully. I have learned that life is definitely about factions. It's not about that which is logical. It's about maintaining the status quo. That's one of the primary things I've learned from just observing. It's about what the world is doing, what people are doing, and society is doing, and communities are doing, is maintaining the status quo. Of course, things are moving forward more rapidly these days on a lot of fronts, but up until about 5 years ago, it was just, the usual maintaining the status quo. So it's just something I feel like kind of needs to be stated. I will concede certain, or I will conceal certain identities and not use full names, but I want those people to know that their choices and actions have not gone unnoticed. I see the machinations of their subconscious strategies. I make notes, and so I proceed. All right. So Carl Jung wrote, "The meeting with oneself is at first the meeting with one's own shadow. The shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door, whose painful constriction no one is spared who goes down to the deep well. But one must learn to know oneself in order to know who one is." End quote. In traversing the Elvin Secret Stairs, I have come to understand Jung's words more fully. In many circles, this description is akin to shamanistic studies, which prepare one for the next level of conscious evolution. I believe in preparing one's soul, if not one's psyche. At any rate, the concept of identity is, shall we say, fluid and at times non-existent. Buddha would say that meaning is an illusion. Noam Chomsky might say language is problematic. And Laurie Anderson once said, language is a virus from outer space. Maybe they're all right. And now part 3 of the Elvin Secret Stairs. After I moved to Minneapolis, I worked many jobs and eventually began a 17-year period of decorative painting, tackling murals, faux finishing, Venetian plaster, and the like. I was traveling a good deal, coast to coast in the United States. In the mid-90s, I was contracted to paint a residence in Midtown Manhattan across the street from Trump Tower and about 4 blocks from Central Park. I had originally intended to stay with friends in the Village, but at the last minute their building sold and I was shuttled to Park Slope, Brooklyn to stay with Tate, the woman I would be working with on this project. Tate's mother owned a large 3-story brownstone residence, and the 3rd floor of the brownstone was their guest suite, and that's where I stayed. It was pretty fabulous. I went to the airport in Minneapolis, and then of course flew to LaGuardia. I arrived I took a taxi from the airport. I can't remember, was it LaGuardia or JFK? I just don't remember. At any rate, took a cab to Tate's house, and with my luggage in hand, knocked on the door, and they welcomed me in. They were just sitting down to dinner, to their evening meal. So they were all around the table, and the food was all sitting there. They literally had just sat down. They're like, "Join us, please sit down," blah, blah, blah. So I sat down, and Tate's mother, asked, "Well, how was your flight?" And I said, it was really good. I do enjoy flying, so that's always something I look forward to. And but when I got to the airport, in Minneapolis and got up to the ticket counter where I was going to pick up my boarding pass, the woman there says, after I gave her my ID and she looked me up in the system, and she's like, "All right, we have you flying to Manhattan via St. Louis. You're going to have a 3-hour layover in St. Louis." I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds right." And she goes, "Okay, so I have a direct flight to New York, but it leaves an hour later. Would you be interested in taking the later flight and bypassing the layover in St. Louis?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I would. That would be awesome." I mean, that's so out of the norm for airlines. I think a lot of times they won't give you a direct flight, when you've already purchased a flight that, has a layover, because those ticket prices are different. But I don't know. That's what she offered me. And so I said, "Okay, great." So I normally, when I was traveling a lot for work in the 90s. And so I always took a book with me when I was going to be on a flight, because they were, flights were, I was coast to coast. And so minimum of like 3.5, 4 hours on a plane, if there's a layover and then another flight, even longer. But I always took a book with me, because then I could just, get into the book, and the flight seemed to go faster. That's sort of a common thing. So I had neglected to take the time to get a book for myself for this flight. So what with getting the sudden opportunity to take an hour later flight, that afforded me time to run to the bookstore at the airport and get a book. So as I mentioned in the last episode, my college friend, Ryant, had given me the book Communion, written by Whitley Strieber. Now, if you don't know anything about Whitley Strieber and his Communion trilogy, that series of books is all about his experience with, the Greys, as he calls them, the visitors. And, his experiences, range, from different locations, in the United States. But by the time you get to the second and third books, the story is centered on all the experiences happening to him in his cabin in upstate New York. And I mean, the third book is just all about the cabin in upstate New York and all of his experience with the Greys and of course the accompanying UFOs and all of that stuff. So if you don't know about Whitley Strieber, you might want to just look that up and confirm that for yourself. So I sit down to dinner with Tate's family. And of course, like I said, Tate's mom asked me, how was your flight? And I got a direct flight. So I was able to go to the bookstore and get a book. And so then I was able to just, enjoy my flight more fully by being able to read a book. Well, Tate's stepfather taught English and literature at a small private college in Manhattan. And he's like, oh, well, what book did you buy? Now, I know better than to talk about this topic. Back in the day, because I tried a lot and just got ridiculed and treated like crap. So I just didn't talk about it. It was just better for me, all the way around to just keep it to myself, instead of being treated like crap. So anyway, I said, oh, you wouldn't be interested. It was, by an author whose work is not well received. And it was just sort of, I've read the first 2 books in the series, and then I saw that the third one had come out in paperback, and I didn't want to invest in a hardcover version of this book. So when I saw the paperback on sale, I'm like, all right. And so he's like, what's the book? And so he just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And I'm like, he like 3 times. I'm like, fine. I said, well, it's written by this author. It's written by Whitley Strieber, and it's all about his experiences in his cabin in upstate New York. And the room went dead silent. I literally was staring eye to eye with everybody in the room at the table, and they were all frozen. Tate, her mom, her stepdad, her 2 stepbrothers, they were all just like, they were literally mid-fork to mouth in motion, and they're just frozen holding their forks, and I'm just like staring at them like, and I'm like, I knew I shouldn't have said anything. Because this is just going to turn into a shit show now. Well, not a shit show, but, going to get weird and uncomfortable, and people are going to like, whatever. And there was silence, this uncomfortable silence for a little while. And then Tate's mom just like speaks up and she's like, well, that's interesting, Joel, because we just bought that property. And then I went wide-eyed and stared at Tate's mom, kind of like, what? Like, oh my God. The implications just in my mind, which is like, what are the chances? Because that book I'd bought in the bookstore at the airport that, I'd gone to my gate, checked in, got my boarding pass, blah, 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 stamped or whatever happened at the time. And I sat down and just devoured this book. I just read this feverishly tore into this book. So I sat at the gate and read it for like an hour and 15 minutes. And then I read it for 3.5 hours on the plane, as I'm flying to New York. And so I got like a good portion of the beginning of this book read, and it was I was intrigued. I was very much into it because of all of my personal experiences and everything that had happened to me up until that point. So I was just like, woo, this is like crack. And I am a crackhead. In the sense of, that everything in that moment. And so I was just sort of like stunned by Tate's mother's comment. And so, someone spoke up and changed the topic. And, we started conversing about other things. And so, I was there for a 3-week project. And Tate and I would take the train into Manhattan from their home in Park Slope, Brooklyn, every day. And we worked, Monday through Friday, and then we had weekends off. And so I ended up just hitting it off with Tate's mom and her family. And we just got along famously and had a lot of fun. And I just really enjoyed staying there. And it was just a really, really exceptional trip, like out of town business trip, and it was fun, and the project we were doing wasn't really that hard, and which was nice. And so after 2 weeks there, it was, like I said, it's going to be a 3-week project, and we only had like a couple more days work to do on that project, and then I would fly back. And so it just happened to be, I think it was Memorial Day weekend. And so, at dinner one evening, because I was also doing some freelance work with my friend Carl, doing floral design for some really upscale restaurants, and he had a really fantastic business as a floral designer in Manhattan. So I was helping him with some projects as well. And we would go to the floral wholesaler there. And so I bought a bunch of beautiful skyline roses as a thank you for them hosting me, and I bought other gifts for them and whatnot. And so it turned out to be such a wonderful experience. And so when the Memorial Day weekend rolled around, we were going to have a 3-day weekend, we're going to start work on, I think we had to finish up on Tuesday, maybe have a little more to do on Wednesday, and then fly back. And so Tate's mom was like, well, Joel, we've decided to go up to the cabin this weekend, and we all wanted to know if you wanted to come along. And I was just, oh my God, I was just so excited. I was like, oh my God. It's like, so did you want to come along? And I said, is a frog's ass watertight? Like, yes. I'm like, I would love that. Thank you so much for asking. And that would just be lovely. So, we finished up our work that day and came home and got packed and everything. And, we left Friday evening because it was going to be like a 2.5 hour drive from Park Slope to this property in upstate New York. And so we left, immediately when Kate and I got off the train in Park Slope. And as we approached, as we got to upstate New York, of course, the sun had gone down and there was no moon. There was no moon. And I was really amazed at how there was nothing but trees. Upstate New York is so densely populated by trees and not people. It seemed like it was a true wilderness almost, because you could, the lights of the towns, and there were few and far between. I remember at one point in time in the drive upstate that evening, we were up, it gets kind of mountainous there, definitely gets almost like a mountainous area. And we were up on this, high point, and it just was so dark. There was no moon. You could see the stars, of course, but there was no moon. It was just so dark. So we arrive, and they have this, we arrive at the front gate in this really remote location, and they have a remote control, and the gate has like these 2 huge gargoyles, and it's remote controlled and motorized and stuff. So we, pull up to the house and unload, and, everyone was tired and everything. And, we basically everyone just like went to bed. I was staying in the guest bedroom, which is at the far end of the house, and everybody else is at the other end of the house, or so as I recall. And so I'm there, I'm in my guest bedroom, I'm in bed, and I'm reading the book, right? The third book in the Communion series. It's called Breakthrough. It's book 3. And I'm reading it, and it starts describing stuff that happens at Whitley Strieber's cabin. So I'm literally, and in particular, the bedroom I'm staying in. So if you've read that book, you will know that the one bedroom at the far end of the house was the guest bedroom for when Whitley Strieber owned it, and was now the guest bedroom when Tate's parents owned it, Tate's mom. And a lot of stuff occurred to guests in that bedroom, and a lot of stuff occurred in that room. And so I'm sitting there reading the book. I'm reading the book about the house and the room I'm in. And it's just sort of like, it's about the house I'm in. It's about the room I'm in. And I'm just sort of like, oh my God. I'm just sort of like, oh my God. And of course I was just so turbocharged energy-wise. It's kind of like, oh my God, and I'm just like reading the book and reading the book and reading the book. And as was my pattern from that time period, it would, on a regular evening in my own home, in my own bed, it would take me like about 45 minutes to fall asleep, sometimes longer. Because, of course, I was always a bit of an insomniac. And I, was just prepared for that always because I just had trouble falling asleep and I was so hyper and, and I just didn't, fall asleep right away. And I remember just suddenly being like so tired, just so incredibly tired. And I thought, oh, it's been a long day and a long week and this is all the excitement. And I just put, my bookmark in my book and set it on the nightstand and just out like a light, which was highly unusual. So I'm out like a light and I just sleep. Now, normally during that period in my life, I did a lot of dreaming. I would wake up and would just have like a lot of dreams to recall because that was another one of my practices. I would always wake up in the morning and then sort of call back my dreams and sort of like see if I could, get a dream to reappear and be like, oh, I remember that now. And then you can sort of remember your dreaming. And that was a practice of mine. It was just a hobby. Not that it was important. It's just something that I had chosen to do when I was quite young. And so, I go to bed and fall asleep immediately. And so the next morning I wake up and it's completely light out. And I was sort of like, the first thing I thought was like, oh, I was hoping something would happen last night. Because in that book, Whitley Strieber describes big, huge blue lights in the yard and all this stuff, right? And no, nothing. I just didn't have, I sat there and thought, and I'm thinking well, what did I dream last night? And I couldn't remember any dreams. And I just was literally it was just like the night was a black blank. I never got up to go to the bathroom. And I never moved. I don't remember dreaming anything. I'm like, okay, well, whatever. So I get up, I get dressed, I think I showered and then, got dressed because I had my own bathroom, as I recall. I can't even remember right now. Yeah, I did. And so I get dressed and I go downstairs and here's Tate and her mom and her family. And they're like, we've been waiting for you to get up. And I'm like, okay, sorry. And Tate and her mom were like, did you hear it? Did you hear it last night? Did you hear it on the roof last night? And I'm like, what? And I'm like, I didn't hear anything. And they recounted and described to me the stuff that had happened. And they were saying that, about, I don't know, half of an hour after they'd gone to bed, because they'd all gone to bed quite late. Well, we all had. After that drive, I think it was well after midnight by the time we actually, got to bed. And they said, a little after 2 a.m., they heard what sounded like someone pounding on the top of the roof, or what ended up they decided was footsteps on the top of the roof. And it's this long cabin-like design home. Because on the outside, it's literally like a log cabin. Those sort of yellow golden pine logs that are all polished and everything. It's a very nice upscale cabin because Whitley Strieber had it built. And they said it sounded like people were jumping on the roof and then running. And Tate was like, and Tate's mom even chimed in and said, yeah, they kept running down to your end of the house. And we kept wondering what was going on. And then they would, come back and and then they would run back down to your end of the house. Like, you didn't hear that? I'm like, no, I didn't hear anything. And they were just stared at me. And I'm like, honestly, I didn't hear anything. And I was so disappointed. I was so bummed out because I just was I wanted to just see things face to face, So anyway, that day, we spent, I think we went to some garage sales and there was a gardening store because they were big gardeners, and I bought some oriental lilies and Asiatic lilies and to sort of donate as a thank you and plant in their yard there. And they loved that. And so we did some gardening and we did a little bit of hiking and had just a really fun day. And then we, barbecued and had a big meal and hung out around the pool, and it was, a really nice day. And that was Saturday. And so we stayed up, fairly late and just, having a few glasses of wine and snacking on, the leftovers and stuff. And so then, everybody went to bed and I went back to my room in the guest wing and began reading the book again. Here I am reading the book about the house and the room I'm in, right? And once again, I'm overcome with this like incredible tiredness. And I'm like, oh, just like out like a light, completely out like a light. Wake up the next morning, nothing had happened, right? I don't recall anything happening. And I just like ran back through my memory of like, what was my dreams? What did I dream? What happened last night? And again, just a black screen. There was no memories of any dreams. I didn't get up to go to the bathroom, which was weird because we'd been drinking wine all night long. And, so I get dressed and I come downstairs. And then once again, here's Tate and her mom like, "Ooh, we were waiting for you to get up. Oh my God, did you hear it last night? Did you hear it last night?" And I'm just like, I didn't hear anything. And they were like, "How could you not?" And they said that there were the big, like at one point in time, they did see, they said it was weird because we could tell, the floodlights were triggered by something. Whitley Strieber had installed like the most advanced security system possible at that time when he built the house. And it has all these motion sensors and all these floodlights, like these massive floodlights. And they said the floodlights were going, the security system was being triggered and the floodlights were going off, and sometimes they, right before the floodlight, because after they are on like a sensor and they would get triggered. And if the motion didn't continue, then the lights would eventually, turn back off again. And then they said they saw like, they could see that somewhere there was this weird blue ambient light, but they couldn't figure out where it was at. And they were trying to look out the windows, and then the floodlights would get triggered and they would hear like the running on the rooftops again. And Tate's mom and Tate said to me, it sounded like someone jumped down onto the house and then ran down to your end of the house. And that was the pattern. And I was like, okay, well, I didn't hear any of that. I slept like the most perfect dreamless sleep ever. And I had heard nothing. I did not get up to go to the bathroom or anything. And they just stared at me like they didn't believe me, like I was denying it. I'm like, I didn't hear anything, and I expressed that I was disappointed too. I'm like, I'm very excited to, hear that, to experience this and to whatever, but I didn't remember anything. And it was just so frustrating. And so, that was, let's see. So that was Sunday morning. So I'm like, okay. So then we, I think there was like this little store, this little town nearby, and they were going to have this big garage sale kind of thingy in there. And so we went down and did some garage sailing, and they had the church had a bunch of tables out, and I bought this great, Moorish statue, that I still have to this day. It was a metal statue, and it was like $5. And I'm like, oh my God. And so, we went garage sailing. We had another lovely day. We had fun and came back and watered the stuff we'd planted in the garden, hung out and barbecued and just ate, had a feast around, at the tables next to the pool. And I went swimming, and I just did this practice diving in the pool because nobody else wanted to go swimming. So I got the pool to myself, and I kept diving into the pool. Well, after this trip, Tate's stepfather, unbeknownst to me, had been taking pictures of me diving. And then he made a collage with 3 separate photos of me, one standing on the diving board. And then he added this second one. He pieced it all together in this collage. So it looked like it was 3 versions of me all in one photo. So there's one on the right end of the photo and I'm going to post these all in the comments section of the podcast on YouTube so you can look at them. And then there's, the picture of me just leaving the diving board. And then there's a photo of me like just entering the water. It's kind of a clever montage. And he sent that to me like, a few weeks after our trip. And like I said, we get up Sunday morning and they were like, did you see it? Did you hear it? Did you see the lights? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I didn't hear anything. So I was really disappointed. So we had our day and then had our, evening meal and hung out. And Tate's mom and I were, they'd put on some Glenn Miller and we were ballroom dancing around the pool and just had a blast. And everyone was cocktailing pretty heavily, I think. They were, and of course I was having cocktails too, but we weren't drunk. This was a very tasteful gathering. We had a nice time. And so then everybody went to bed. And of course I'm in bed and I'm reading the book and I'm waiting. I'm like, okay, this is the night. I'm going to see something, I'm going to see the lights. I hope I see blah, 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 blah. Nope. Suddenly overwhelmed with exhaustion and can't keep my eyes open and fall fast asleep immediately. And then of course, wake up the next morning and I'm like, again, nothing had happened. Again, it was a 3-day week. So this is Monday morning. I wake up, Memorial Day, whatever. And I'm sort of like sitting there in the bed, like nothing happened. I'm like, we have to go home today. It's like, this is, such a, rotten. I think we were going to stay an extra day because we only had a few things to do on that job and they wanted to have a 4-day weekend at the cabin. I think that's what it was. We were going to stay Monday night too. So I got up. I'm like, okay, well, there's always tonight. It's my last night. So I get up and get dressed and go down and I walk and I always come down the stairs and the stairs, terminate at the bottom in the kitchen. And I come down and it's just Tate's stepfather and nobody else. And so I just sort of like said, hey, Walter. He's like, Joel, I need to talk to you. I'm like, okay. And it was a very serious tone. Walter had a very serious tone. And he was just looking me just like this was like a serious thing. Whatever he wanted to talk to me about was a serious thing. And I'm like, okay. And I have no problem looking people in the eye. None whatsoever. And so I looked Walter in the eye and I go, what's going on, Walter? He goes, it is vitally important that you not mention Whitley Strieber or his books or the subject matter of his books ever in front of Kate. And certainly from this moment forward for the remainder of this trip and for the remainder of your visit with us, with the remainder of your stay with us. And he was like, do you understand what I'm saying to you? And I'm like, I do. And I'm happy to comply, and I won't mention Whitley Strieber or UFOs or the visitors or any of that stuff whatsoever. And he's like, okay, I really appreciate that. And at this point in time, Kate's mom came in and sat down, and she sort of confirmed, like, this is important. Please, this is really important. Tate had a very difficult evening, and we just cannot talk about this ever again. This is not something we wish to discuss, and please don't mention it to Tate. Just be very, very gentle with her today and for the remainder of your stay. And I'm like, you got it. Because I respected these people. I genuinely liked these people. And I really appreciated their generosity and their graciousness. So I was happy to comply, and I understood that So there was a period later that day when sort of the tensions lifted and things relaxed a little bit. And Tate's mom said to me, she's like, she told me what happened that night a little bit, but she said they sat up and hearing the footsteps on the rooftop. But then, and that Tate really wanted to, Tate's mom said that Tate just kept wanting to go down to your end of the room, the end of the house, just to see
if you were hearing the stuff because you hadn't heard any of it, the previous evenings, and that you had you hadn't heard anything. So Tate wanted to know because the activity was taking place, down at year end. So Tate went down the hallway apparently. And when Tate came back, she was unwell, and she was terrified, and she was completely freaked out and barely able to communicate, and was crying, and her face was swelling up. And by that evening, later on that, whatever, it's like 3:00 in the morning, her face had swollen up considerably, and they were very concerned. By morning, the swelling had gone down, they said, but when I finally saw Tate, I could see there was still some swelling going on. And that was something that was reported in Whitley Strieber's books, that some of the people who were guests at his cabin would have contact with the Greys and would have an allergic reaction. And they would have this exact symptom where their faces would get very puffy, as if they had gotten, like when people have an allergic reaction to poison ivy or something like that, there's swelling involved. So whatever happened to Tate, I never heard the whole story. I just heard little sort of vague bits from her family. It was very somber from that moving forward. And instead of staying Monday night, they were like, we're going to go ahead and we're going to head back into town. I'm like, okay. And so we packed up, and it was a very quiet ride back into town. And, the next day, Tate and I just had to go and do touch-ups at this town. It was a condominium, like I said. And we just had to basically pull the masking tape, do touch-ups, and we were done. And so that's what we did. We did it, and the client was thrilled. The client was so thrilled and super happy, and that really helped, I think, Tate's frame of mind, and me, for that matter. And so then, we completed the painting project, and we're completely done, and got the thumbs up, and we were done with that. And then just took the train back to Tate's mom's house, and we had a quiet dinner, and just everyone sort of kept to themselves. And then the next morning I flew back home. And so I just thanked them profusely. And I sent them a thank you in the mail after that, after I gotten back. But reality is something happened. Unfortunately, I was not privy to it. And I did not have direct experience with what happened that evening. And it is curious to me that I don't remember anything. And this is kind of one of the little enigmas and mysteries of my life, that evening where normally I would remember stuff, and yet I did not. And there are other evenings where the next episode will be, part 4 of the Elvin Secret Stairs, which takes place in my family's farm in Iowa. And again, there was an evening where I didn't hear anything, but boy, did my parents experience something. So that will be next week's episode, part 4 of the Elvin Secret Stairs, where we pick up the story again at my parents' farm in eastern Iowa. Thank you for tuning in, and I will look forward to next week, and hope you will tune in. Thanks again. Take care.